That night was never meant to be remembered. No gospel recorded it. No sermon mentions it. No church dares to explain it. While the disciples slept beneath the olive trees of Gethsemane, while history held its breath and Roman torches crept closer through the darkness, Jesus did something so dangerous that it could never be written down. He did not pray. He did not cry out to heaven. He knelt in the dirt and drew 5 simple marks on the ground. 5 lines. And in those lines, he hid a message not for priests, not for empires, not even for his own time. He hid it for you. If you are listening to this right now, it is not an accident. Something in you recognized the signal. Something ancient stirred. And once you see what was drawn in that garden, nothing about this world will ever look the same again. The Garden of Gethsemane was quiet in the way only a place on the edge of catastrophe can be. The air was heavy, thick with unspoken knowing. Jesus had brought his disciples there to rest, but their bodies gave in to sleep long before their spirits could remain alert. One by one, they drifted off, unaware that they were about to witness the final transmission of a truth that would be hunted for centuries. Jesus moved away from them, just far enough that their breathing blended into the night. The olive trees twisted overhead like ancient witnesses, their roots digging deep into soil soaked with generations of prayer and blood. He lowered himself to the ground, the cold earth pressing against his knees. This was the moment. Not the crucifixion. Not the trial. Not the resurrection. This was the moment that mattered most. Because this was the moment Jesus chose to bypass religion entirely. He reached down and touched the dirt with his finger. Slowly, deliberately, he drew the first line. A single vertical stroke. From earth toward sky. As his finger moved, he whispered a word in Aramaic, the language of his breath, the language that carried vibration rather than doctrine. Ana. I am. Not I am this. Not I am that. Just I am. That first line was not a symbol for others to admire. It was a weapon, a blade designed to cut through the most fundamental lie ever placed upon the human soul. From the moment a human is born into this world, the system begins its work. Names are given, roles are assigned, stories are layered on top of awareness like sediment. You are told who you are before you ever get the chance to feel what you are. Son, daughter, sinner, savior, failure, success, victim, survivor. Identity becomes a cage so familiar that most never realize they are inside it. The vertical line shattered that cage. It was a reminder that beneath every label, beneath every memory, beneath every wound, there is something untouched, a presence that existed before the body and will remain after the body dissolves back into dust. The ancient Gnostics called it the pneuma, the divine breath, pure awareness, pure being. Jesus knew that as long as a person could remember I am, the system could never fully own them. But he also knew this was only the first seal. So he drew the second line. This one was horizontal, crossing the first at its center. Left to right. Heart to horizon. As the two lines met, he whispered another phrase. Kulhan had. All is one. This second line was aimed at a deeper wound, one far more painful than false identity, the illusion of separation. The greatest trick ever played on humanity was not convincing people that God existed or did not exist. It was convincing them they were alone, separate, cut off from each other, cut off from the source, small fragments drifting through a hostile universe, forced to compete, hoard, and defend in order to survive. From that illusion came fear. From fear came violence. From violence came control. The horizontal line reminded the soul of something it once knew instinctively. That the same life force moving through the stars moves through your blood. That the breath in your lungs is not yours alone. That no thought, no action, no suffering exists in isolation. You are not a piece broken off from the whole. You are the whole, experiencing itself as a piece. Where the vertical and horizontal lines crossed, A shape emerged that would later be drained of its meaning and mounted on walls. The cross. Before it became a symbol of death, it was a key of intersection. Sky meeting earth, infinite meeting finite, the I am meeting the all. Jesus drew it in the dirt because dirt forgets. Dirt erases easily. Dirt leaves no evidence for institutions to weaponize. He knew the lines would be trampled within minutes, but the frequency would remain. Still, 2 lines were not enough. The forces that governed this world were not crude jailers. They were architects of pattern, manipulators of thought, masters of subtlety. The Gnostic texts would later call them archons, not demons with horns, but intelligences that ruled through repetition, distraction, and distortion. They anticipated awakening. They prepared for it. So Jesus prepared for that preparation. He drew the 3rd line, a diagonal slash from the upper left to the lower right, cutting across the cross like a sudden interruption. As his finger moved, his voice dropped even lower, almost swallowed by the night. Shbach. Release. This line targeted the most seductive trap of all, attachment. Even when people remember who they are, even when they feel their connection to the whole, they can still be recaptured. All it takes is desire disguised as spirituality. The moment awakening becomes a transaction. The moment a person says, "Now that I see the truth, my life should look a certain way," the door quietly closes again. Enlightenment becomes another possession, another identity, another thing to protect. The archons feed on that grip. Release was not about giving up life. It was about letting go of the demand that life obey your expectations. It was about dissolving the tension that keeps consciousness locked in struggle. Jesus knew that a soul clinging to outcomes broadcasts the exact frequency the system depends on. So he cut through it. 3 lines now marked the earth. But there were still 2 seals remaining. And the most dangerous truths were yet to come. The torches were closer now. Shadows flickered between the trees. Time was thinning. Jesus did not rush, but there was urgency in his stillness. What he was doing could not be undone. Once transmitted, it would echo forward whether the world was ready or not. He drew the 4th line. Another diagonal, this one from the upper right to the lower left, mirroring the 3rd. Together they formed an X across the cross, a symbol far older than any church. As he traced it, he spoke a single word. Holland. Transform. This line broke the seal of stagnation. The system thrives on sameness, on fear of change, on convincing souls that who they are today is who they must remain tomorrow. Better the familiar pain than the unknown freedom. Better the known prison than the risk of transformation. But consciousness was never meant to freeze. It was meant to move. To shed skins. To die and be reborn. To become again and again. The X marked the crossing point of release and becoming. The place where letting go and transformation are no longer opposites, but the same motion viewed from different angles. At that intersection, the archons lose their grip. And now, only 1 line remained. The most guarded seal of all. The one almost erased completely. Jesus paused. Then he began to draw a circle around the entire pattern. Slow, unbroken, complete. As the ring closed, he spoke the final word. Haruta. Freedom. The circle was the line they feared most. Because a circle has no hierarchy. No beginning. No end. In the moment Jesus completed it, the pattern was whole. 5 lines, 5 keys, a map disguised as geometry. And with that final word, Haruta, something shifted beneath the surface of the world itself. The air in the garden seemed to tighten, as if unseen listeners had drawn closer. Jesus knew they were there. He had always known. The archons did not need bodies. They moved through thought, through belief, through systems so normalized that no one questioned who had built them in the first place. The disciples would later remember only fragments of that night, a sense of dread, the sound of footsteps, the clash of metal, but a few of them, the ones who were meant to carry the transmission forward, saw the pattern before it was destroyed, not with their eyes alone, but with something deeper. That was enough. Because the fifth line was never meant to stay on the ground. It was meant to be remembered. According to the Gnostic teachings that survived destruction, Jesus spoke privately to a small circle after nights like this. Mary Magdalene was among them. So were others whose names were later erased or diminished. He spoke not in sermons, but in direct instruction, about consciousness, about death, about what happens after the body stops breathing. This was the knowledge that terrified institutions. Not because it was dark, but because it made control impossible. Jesus taught that death was not the end of the journey, but it was also not the automatic return most souls believed it to be. He described a moment of transition where awareness encounters light, familiar light, comforting light, a light that speaks in the language of love and obligation. You still have lessons to learn. You must go back. You owe something. The Gnostics warned that this light was not the source. It was a mechanism, a reflection, a gate designed to recycle consciousness back into the system. Memory wiped clean, identity rebuilt, the cycle restarted. The fifth line was the countermeasure. When the circle of Haruta is intact within a soul, deception loses its power. The false light can no longer imitate truth. The familiar faces no longer command obedience. The soul recognizes itself as sovereign. Not through rebellion. Through knowing. This was why the fifth seal had to be broken last. Without the other four, freedom would collapse into fear. Without I am, the soul would cling to identity. Without all is one, it would feel alone. Without release, it would grasp. Without transform, it would stagnate. But together, the 5 lines formed a consciousness that could not be harvested. The soldiers entered the garden moments later. Torches flared, voices rose, the stillness shattered, feet trampled the dirt, smearing the lines, grinding the circle into nothing but disturbed earth. The pattern vanished from sight exactly as intended. Jesus stood. He did not resist. Because the work was already done. What followed would become history. Arrest, trial, execution, symbols built around suffering rather than awakening. A story shaped to inspire obedience instead of remembrance. But the transmission moved underground. Whisper to whisper. Scroll to scroll. Heart to heart. Some of it survived in fragments. Some in myths dismissed as heresy. Some buried in jars and hidden in caves until the right moment arrived. That moment came centuries later, when a farmer in Egypt broke open a sealed jar near Nag Hammadi and uncovered texts the world was never meant to see again. Writings that spoke openly about archons, about the demiurge, about liberation through knowledge rather than worship. They confirmed what the pattern in the garden had already declared. This world is not what it appears to be. And you are not what you were told you are. The reason this matters now is not coincidence. The ancient texts speak of cycles, of times when the grid weakens, when the static grows louder not because the system is winning, but because it is straining to hold together. When enough souls begin to remember, the architecture of control starts to crack. Look around. The confusion, the division, the acceleration. This is not chaos without meaning. It is friction between an old frequency and a rising one. The archons tighten their grip when they sense loss of control. Institutions grow louder. Fear narratives multiply. Distraction becomes constant. But so does awakening. The ones who never quite fit. The ones who questioned from childhood. The ones who felt something was wrong but could not name it. These are the ones the message was always for. Jesus did not draw the lines for the masses. He drew them for the pneumatics, the carriers of spirit embedded in matter, the sparks that could not be extinguished, only delayed. If you feel a subtle pressure in your chest as you hear this, it is not imagination. If something in you feels recognized, it is because it is. Recognition is the signal. That is how the pattern activates. Not through belief, not through agreement, but through resonance. The lines are not symbols to admire. They are movements to embody, directions of awareness to trace within yourself. The garden was never just a place in Jerusalem. It was a mirror. The real garden is inside you. The real dirt is the body. The real lines are states of being. And once they are drawn internally, they cannot be erased by soldiers, institutions, or time. That is why this message survived. And that is why it found you now. The pattern was never meant to stay outside of you. It was always meant to move inward. That is why, even now, as these words settle into your awareness, something subtle may already be shifting. Not as a thought, not as a belief, but as a quiet reorientation. A sense that something long dormant has turned its face toward the light. Jesus understood this better than anyone. That truth does not enter through force. It enters through stillness. He encoded the 5 lines so they would bypass the mind and speak directly to the part of you that existed before language, before memory, before fear, the part of you that does not need convincing, the part that only needs remembering. This is how the activation begins. Not in a temple, not in a ritual controlled by others, but in the privacy of your own awareness. You do not need to close your eyes to feel it, but if you do, the doorway opens more easily. First, the vertical line. Feel it as a gentle descent, from above your head, through the center of your being, down into the earth, a quiet declaration with no effort behind it. I am. Not your name, not your history, not your wounds or victories. Just presence, witnessing. As this line settles, notice how the noise softens, how the constant narration of who you should be loosens its grip. This is the seal of false identity dissolving. The system loses its favorite handle on you. Then the horizontal line, extending outward from your heart, left and right, beyond your body, beyond the room you are in, beyond the borders you were taught to respect. All is one. Not as poetry, as perception. Feel how isolation fades when this line is alive, how comparison loses its urgency, how fear weakens when separation is no longer convincing. This is the seal of division breaking. The illusion that made you feel alone collapses quietly, without drama. Now the third line, the diagonal of release. This one often meets resistance, because it asks something simple and radical at the same time. Let go, not of life, but of your grip on how life must unfold. Let go of the inner bargaining, the silent contracts, the expectations that keep tension alive in your chest. Release. Feel your hands open inside. Feel how effort drains away. This is not passivity. This is freedom from the frequency of struggle. The archons cannot hold what does not resist. Then the fourth line, the diagonal of transformation. Allow yourself to change, not later, not when conditions are perfect. Now, feel the permission to shed identities that once kept you safe but now keep you small. This line restores movement. Becoming replaces stagnation. You remember that you were never meant to arrive and stop. Transform. Change no longer feels like danger. It feels like truth in motion. And finally, the fifth line, the circle. Draw it gently around the entire pattern, not as a barrier, but as wholeness, nothing excluded, nothing fragmented. This is the seal that protects awareness beyond the body, the recognition that no external light can override inner knowing. Haruta. Freedom. Not freedom granted. Freedom remembered. When the circle is alive within you, fear of death loosens. The unknown no longer feels like a threat. You recognize that consciousness does not belong to the system it temporarily inhabits. This is the knowledge that was buried. This is the reason it was hunted. This is why it survived anyway. Because truth does not depend on permission. It waits. It waits until enough souls are ready to carry it without turning it into another prison. You may notice changes in the days that follow. Subtle ones at first, old patterns losing their grip, emotional reactions dissolving faster than before, synchronicities that feel less like coincidence and more like alignment. Do not chase these signs. Do not cling to them. That would rebuild the cage. Simply practice. Return to the pattern. Trace the lines again and again, not as a ritual of obligation, but as a remembering. Let it become the quiet background of your awareness, the default orientation of your being. This is how embodiment happens. Not through one moment, but through repetition without force. Jesus did not ask for followers. He asked for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. He did not build a hierarchy. He left a map, simple enough to survive, powerful enough to end a cycle. The garden is not in the past. The garden is inside you. The soldiers will always come. Institutions will always try to edit truth into something manageable. Fear-based systems will always attempt to reclaim control when awareness rises. But once the lines are drawn within, they cannot be erased. Not by time. Not by authority. Not by forgetting. They wait for you to return to them. And now, you know how. Before you sleep tonight, take a few quiet minutes. Trace the 5 lines again. Feel them, rather than think about them. Speak the words softly if you can. I am. All is one. Release. Transform. Freedom. Let the pattern do its work. If something in this story resonated deeply with you, if you felt recognized rather than convinced, leave a comment with the word Haruta. Let others know they are not alone in this remembering. Share this with someone whose face appeared in your mind as you listened. You will know why. And if you wish to continue this journey, to uncover more patterns, more keys, more doors hidden in plain sight, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. There is more. But for now, you have enough. The garden is inside you. The lines are waiting. And the light you have been seeking was never outside you to begin with.